they can work for somebody else. 90% of Goldman Sachs' profits were generated through proprietary trading. How does that doesn't do anything to improve the country, because somebody lost money. But whatever they made, somebody lost it. They're just trading, they're pushing paper around. They're not underwriting new businesses, they're not helping entrepreneurs get capital to form new businesses, they're just speculating in commodities, in currencies, in stocks. They're not adding any value to the economy, certainly not to the point where we have to make it a national priority and bail them out so they can earn huge bonuses. But what we've done is we've prevented the economy from restructuring in a productive way. And as a result, there is no recovery coming. Anybody who thinks that the future is bright just doesn't understand the past and doesn't understand economics. People are hopeful that we're going to start getting jobs. Right? The president is making jobs. Right? He wants a jobs bill. Well, jobs aren't created because governments pass bills. Right? Jobs are destroyed because governments pass bills. And what people have to understand is there are no jobs coming. Jobs are going to keep being lost because the economy is being starved for capital because the government is getting so big. You see, when the government is spending $4 trillion a year, where's that money coming from? It's coming from the private sector. It is bleeding the private sector dry. There is no resources, there is no capital to create jobs because the government's taking it all. And what the government isn't taking, it's directing to housing, it's directing to education, it's directing to bloated sectors of our economy, for healthcare, where it doesn't need to go. And so the government is preventing the jobs that we need from coming into existence. And so people are just going to be unemployed. Now, eventually, I think the unemployment rate will get so high that the government will actually start providing jobs for people directly. And they'll be make work jobs. I mean, maybe they get 100 people to dig ditches and then 100 people to fill them back up again. And they'll say they're creating jobs. And yeah, the government can create jobs all it wants. It can give everybody a job, but it can't create any purchasing power. And so ultimately, the more people that the government employs, the fewer people that the private sector can employ. And then the fewer people that are working to pay the bills. How are you going to pay the government workers? The only reason government workers can have a job is because the private sector is working and paying the taxes to support them. Because most public sector jobs are not productive. They feed off of the private sector jobs. And so you have to have a solid base in the private sector to be able to support the public sector. But the minute the public sector gets too big, it destroys the private sector, and then it's just an implosion. Because it just feeds on itself. It's like a destructive, job-killing loop. And as more and more people just end up working for the government, we have nothing. We have a bunch of people with jobs, but everybody is broke because there's no productivity. Nothing is being built. Nothing is being manufactured. So the paychecks don't buy anything. And that's what ends up happening. Everybody in the Soviet Union had a job. There was no unemployment problem in the Soviet Union. The problem was that the employed people couldn't buy anything because their wages had no value. And that's why we want to work. We don't want to work so we can work. That's not the fun part. The fun part is spending the money that you earn. And if you can't do that because it has no value, because there's no productivity associated with it, we're just running it off a printing press, then it's not going to matter. And that's where we're headed. And the next crisis that's coming is going to be the currency crisis. And that could hit maybe as early as this year. But it might not happen until 2011 or 2012. There's just no way to know precisely when these things are going to happen. Just like I didn't know precisely when the NASDAQ bubble would burst or the housing bubble. I just knew that it would. And the dollar bubble, the treasury bubble, whatever you want, is going to burst. And when it does, the fallout will be shock. It'll be much worse than what happened in the financial crisis. Because the government is not going to be able to bail anybody out, because it's going to be the government that needs a bailout. And there's nobody big enough to do it. And so what's going to happen is we're going to have two choices when the currency crisis hits. Either we do the right thing that we failed to do 2 times in the past. The government levels with the American public and says, look, these are the problems, and this is what we have to do. And the government allows all the banks that they bailed out the last time to fail again, and it doesn't bail them out next time. It allows housing prices to collapse and allows homes to be foreclosed, and does not try to find a program to prop them back up. the government makes serious cuts in the budget in a recession, which is something that everybody thinks you don't do, and that's again thanks to Keynes. We need to cut spending in the recession because the government is a burden. In good times, you can afford to spend a lot of money on government. You'd be better off not doing it, but at least you can afford it. But when times are tough, that's when you really have to cut government because you can't afford the nonsense anymore. You're too broke. So we have to have the government to acknowledge this and make serious cuts in the budget. Not talk about freezing the budget a year from now and make 20% of the budget. Talking about real cuts. Telling people that are getting checks from the government right now that they're not going to get those checks anymore. Or they're going to get much smaller checks. Because the country is too broke. The taxpayers don't have the money to afford that government spending. And just eliminate departments, slash spending, slash entitlements, let the chips fall where they may, and let interest rates go up, because they need to go up, because they're too low. And of course, what's going to happen when this happens? The government is going to have to fess up, and we're going to have some kind of meeting with our creditors and admit that we can't pay the bills, and restructure the debt, and offer our creditors a plan. And I think that's what we need to do. And I don't think that our creditors are blameless. After all, they were dumb enough to lend us all the money. They should have known we couldn't pay back. I mean, how could we? So we need to, we need to restructure this, and we need to get the economy back on sound footing. Now, if we don't do that, which I know is politically unheard of, and that's what I want to push for when I get to Congress, I want to make sure that we take that option. The next option is to repeat the mistakes again and say, well, we're just going to stimulate. If no one in the world wants to buy our bonds, well, Ben Bernanke can buy them. And just we print, and then instead of just getting a big collapse, we end up getting hyperinflation. We completely destroy the value of our money, and that is going to lead to chaos, to civil unrest, to, I think, price controls, to rioting, to black markets, to exchange controls, to all sorts of terrible, horrific things that will happen if we continue on the current policy course that we're on. And that is where we're headed. We do have to change. We have to get the politicians to do what, as of this point, they've refused to do. And the problem is, the longer we wait to do the right thing, the less likely it is that we'll do it, because the more painful it is. That is the problem. And we have to get the politicians to understand that it's better to bite the bullet. That it's better to face the consequences now, rather than postpone them and make them worse. But the politicians, since they only care about getting reelected, to them, that's the better way. If I can postpone it and get reelected, well, that's what I'm doing, even if I make it worse. So that's the mentality that has to stop in Washington. And we have to stop it soon, because we can't really kick this can down the road anymore, because at this point, the problems are just so insurmountable. And if we do end up with that hyperinflation, see, the real problem is, the worse the economy gets, the more rights we lose, because the government takes advantage of that opportunity, and the public is afraid, and they look to the government to help them, to protect them, to make things better. And there's an exchange. You trade your liberties, you trade your rights, because the government promises you that it's going to help you. And of course, when you do that, it's like selling your soul to the devil, and ultimately, you don't get all the goodies that the government promises you, and you lose your rights in the bargain, and you end up living in a totalitarian society. And so we need to make sure that doesn't happen. And I don't know that the people in Washington are necessarily evil. I just think they're foolish, and they just respond to their natural political instincts to get reelected and grab power. And a lot of them are just elitists. They actually believe this nonsense. I mean, believe it or not, despite the fact that socialism has failed every time it's been tried, over and over again, people still think it works. President Obama thinks it works. I did an interview with an Australian television show one time, and I started talking about this, and the host interrupted me and said, "Are you suggesting that the president is a closet socialist?" I said, "He's not in a closet." And all the people that he surrounds himself with, this is their ideology. There's plenty of professors here at Yale University that are socialists. When I went to Berkeley, when I was a freshman at Cal, when I had government, the first course, like introduction, poli-sci 1 or whatever it was, and I sat in on the lecture, and I listened to this woman speak. And at the end of I went to her first office hours, and I said, excuse me,